A few years ago, we traveled to one of our family's favorite vacation spots, and we had saved, we had skimped on purchases, we had looked for deals, and even had a family that generously had helped us with tickets going to this place, and we were ready for the happiest place on earth, or so we thought. I remember being several hours into this trip, and one of the first days there, it was really just on the first day there. We're there until the first day, only the first day. And my daughters both were upset. They were probably overly tired from going to the park all day and riding a bunch of rides and having to walk all over that concrete jungle known as Disney World. But when you prepared so long and worked so hard to even get there, to be at the happiest place on earth, you want people that you're with to be happy. This is the happiest place on earth. In the middle of some whining, not from any of the adults, I turned and kind of half-jokingly said to my kids, "We spent a lot of money and time for you to be here. Now be happy." A few years removed from that, more than a few years, I guess, now, when I look at how small they are in that picture, it isn't hard for me to see, as much as that was a joke at the time, it's often what we try to do in life. We either try to acquire happiness many times through kind of consumerism. We buy certain things to make us happy, or we try to cover up our feelings with enough noise and visuals to distract us from how unhappy we are. As you walk into stores this time of year, there's tons of upbeat songs that they play over the speakers, even in your car. There's lights and tinsel kind of everywhere, all around. And the idea is that maybe they'll kind of help us muster up some joy in the season of Christmas. But if we're honest, which a lot of this Advent time has been about, honestly reflecting on how things really are, for some of us, the lights just aren't quite bright enough to erase the pain of grief and heartache, and there isn't just enough tinsel to cover despair that we might have that the holidays bring back to memory for us. Because for some of us, as much as certain songs and smells and things bring up good memories, for some of us, they bring up not so good memories. And even as we lit the Advent candle for joy, we might have mumbled, "Yeah, right." And so that brings us to the question, what is joy and where are we to find it? I'm sure you've heard plenty of sermons on that, or maybe you have written some things about it or taught on it, but this is a reminder of where we find joy. Because if you can't find joy at the happiest place on earth, then where in the world can we look to find joy? It's with that in mind, that kind of framework, that we walk into our text today, which is the 126th Psalm. And if you turn to Psalm 126, you'll see it isn't very long at all. It's not a very long psalm. But the book of Psalms, as you know, is a collection of poetic songs from various authors that span, the scholars believe, at least 5 centuries. It wasn't one person sat and wrote them all. It was different people. And like I said, various authors over 5 centuries. Now, the 126th Psalm specifically is a song that was sung by pilgrims on the journey of ascending the path leading to Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem is up on a hill. And so they called it a song of ascension. Right? It's a song they would sing, almost like, not a Christmas song, obviously. They weren't celebrating Christmas or the birth of Jesus, which hadn't occurred at that time, and for various other reasons. But it was a song to remind them as they ascended towards this place for a festival of Jerusalem. These songs of ascension begin with the 120th Psalm and move the singer in their memory and in their praise as they are physically moved. They were meant to be sung as you went. And so they would go through the Psalms, starting at 120th Psalm, and sing through them as they came into the city. And what we'll uncover as we dig into today's passages is this: joyful expectation is the echo of the memory of a joyful history and participation in God's kingdom. We have joyful expectation because we have had joy in the past and when we are involved in God's kingdom. And so here's what we read as we move into Psalm 126, beginning with the first verse. When the Lord brought back his exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream. We were filled with laughter, and we sang for joy. The psalm begins with remembering, and it says, it was like a dream. It was like a dream. This isn't just like, oh, it was a bad dream. This isn't talking about a nightmare. This is saying this is like a dream come true. Imagine yourself an Israelite in Egypt years and years ago. You were born a slave. And what did you do as a slave? You made bricks from straw and from mud. You put them together, you made a brick, kept making them as the day went on. You went home, went to sleep, got up the next day, took mud, took straw, made a brick, went to bed. There used to be a McDonald's commercial. I don't know if you remember it, but it's a McDonald's commercial that said, get up, go to work, come home, go to bed. Get up, go to work, come home, go to bed. Get up, go to, and they said that, and then they were like, and then on the fourth or fifth time, it's like, get up, go to work, go to McDonald's, and then come home. Sounds pretty good, right, Bob? But that was a break from the monotony of the day. But imagine that you were an Egyptian or an Israelite in Egypt. You would be kind of in the monotony. You'd get up and you make bricks. Not only would you get up and make bricks, but your father was born a slave that made bricks. And so you saw him make bricks, and you saw that as your future because, hey, there's your father who did that. Not only your father, but his father was a slave that made bricks, that took mud and took straw and made bricks, and that was their existence. Now his father's father was a slave that made bricks, that they took straw and they took mud, and his father's father before that made bricks with straw and with mud. And so what could you imagine possibly that your future would look like? Mud and straw and bricks. Things never changed. Every day was the exact same thing. Monotonous, boring, crushing. Your family tried to keep the customs of the old land that your ancestors came from, but why? Nothing ever changed. Not for you, not for anybody in your family. Maybe it was a pie in the sky idea to think they would ever change. Nothing ever changed. But then suddenly it did. Nothing had ever changed, but then God moved. This is the story of the people of God. Nothing had ever changed, but God rescued his people. He split the Red Sea and put them on a journey, a pilgrimage to the home that he had claimed for them. And when they arrived back in the land, it was like a dream. They probably had to pinch themselves and say, I can't believe after all of those years that here we are. It was like a dream come true. It was like a dream that we could have never imagined. In fact, it had been a dream, long talked about, long prayed for, and now that dream had come true. Out of tears and despair, God had brought laughter and songs of joy. It was like a dream. Their past was fading into past memories that they would try to forget. Their new life was in front of them. The opportunity to begin again, looking nothing like what life had looked like, was delivered by God. It was like a dream. And the other nation said, what amazing things the Lord has done for them. Yes, the Lord has done amazing things for us. What joy. What joy. Can you imagine that every time that someone gave you their testimony, they said, what joy. What joy that God moved my life and changed it and made it completely different. What joy in the fact that things are so different than I thought they could ever be. What joy there is in the freedom created in Christ. What joy. They were the talk of all the nations. These people that were slaves to the most powerful country at the time now had their own land years later. There was amazement for all people who had witnessed this. What joy because of what God had done for them. That's the whole context for the memory. And so pilgrims on this long journey up to Jerusalem years later filled their minds with the stories of God's faithful acts. And said, what joy. Joy has a history. And they needed reminded of that history. Joy is nurtured by living in such a history. Joy is built on such a foundation of what God has done in the belief that God will do it again. And so they could talk about what joy God had given them years ago. What's funny is even as I remember and tell that story about my kids saying, you know what, I need you to be happy because we paid a lot of money and time to be here, it really fills me with joy to actually talk about that. Why? Because as much of a kind of frustrating moment it was there in the moment, it overall is a joyful memory. Being at that place with my kids, having fun there, even not having fun there. That moment that I have with my kids fills me with joy. It's not just nostalgia. It's not like I wish I could go back and say, oh, I want to experience that exact moment. It's the time spent with my girls, to be honest. Now, someone told us, our story is filled with going to Disney a couple different times. Someone told us when we took the kids when they were young, partly because they were free under a certain age, but someone said, you know what? Your kids will never remember those trips to Disney. And I said, that's okay, because we will. We'll remember it. We'll remember the time that they spent with us there. They'll look at pictures and they'll say, I don't remember that, and saying, we do. Our memories remind us what has happened in the middle of difficult and strenuous times, and they act as an echo for what can happen in the future. Eugene Peterson wrote this. He said, joy is the verified, repeated experience of those involved in what God is doing. Joy is the verified, repeated experience of those involved in what God is doing. Reminding ourselves of our God-given joy isn't simply for nostalgia of a day that's gone by or of better days that are in the past, but instead, those reminders should lead us into joyful expectation for the days ahead. And to say what we're in right now doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be the story of what the future is going to look like, because God, the same God who has created those experiences for us in the past, is the same God that's creating things now and will continue to create in the future. If the acts of God that produce joy are characteristic of our past with Him, then they will also characterize our future with Him, even if we can't see it, even if we can't understand how that's going to happen. Some people would term that remembering forward. We remember to then predict the future. Not like we're sitting there with a crystal ball, not like we're like putting things together or anything like that, but it's remembering forward, saying, remember what this is so we can look forward and hope for that. It's kind of like a bow or a slingshot that our minds are kind of pulled back to the memories behind us, and then they're unleashed to snap us forward and draw us forward, but the same God goes with us. And they're to launch our minds and our imagination from our memories. Our memories are not supposed to be where we build monuments and say it's never going to be as good as it was in those days. It's to remind us of what is possible going forward. If God is truly the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, then God-given joy of days gone by echo to the expectation of God-given joy in the days to come. The circumstances of today don't change the characteristics of God. They don't. We don't need to read about God by how our circumstances are all around us. Instead, we know that God is still the same. The reason my kids jump out of their car and race up the steps and into grandma's house with great expectation is because of this joyful expectation that they carried on the car ride from Illinois to Ohio. And as it becomes more and more of a reality, they get more and more excited. And when they finally get there, man, it's like a cannon shooting off. And they're going to run in there and say, Grandma! Why? Because their past has told them it's going to be a good thing. Joy expects things to happen. Joy builds expectations for the future based on the history of joy. That's what joy does. And my kids, when they see their grandma, they expect the same experience when they see her again because of the memories of joy they have. Back into the psalm, it says, verse 4, restore our fortunes, Lord. Now we transition from the dream to now. Restore our fortunes, Lord, as streams renew the desert. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. They weep as they go to plant their seeds, but they sing as they return with the harvest. So the psalm moves from the past to address the future, asking God to do it again so that they may hear that echo of what He's done in the past. Do it again in the midst of their despair. Do it again in the midst of their pain. Do it again in the midst of their suffering. Eugene Peterson writes about it this way and says, all suffering, emptiness, and pain is seed. Sow it in God, and one day He will bring you a crop of joy. What if we thought like that? What if we lived like that? That given to the Lord, it'll reap a crop of joy. We don't just have despair to toss out there and say what a horrible thing it is, but it's something that the Lord can redeem and make joyful again. This is remembering forward, built on the history as the people of God know their past. And now as followers of Christ, we are people of God as well. And just like the pilgrims that were making their way to Jerusalem, you and I need reminded of that again and again, because you know what? The message we get from life tells us something different. But we need reminded from God and His Word that we can expect joy if we sow those seeds in the Lord. And so we gather, we worship, we celebrate all that God has done, and we fill our minds with the acts of God, reminding us of the history of joy, and allow it to build an expectation in us, joyful expectation, leading us to ask Him, do it again. Do it again. God, please, in your will and in your way, make it happen again. We need some joy. We need some happiness. We need some, not just happiness, we need that joy that knows that you have not left the throne, that you are not gone to sleep, but God, you are awake and you are active in our world, because what we see around us sometimes tells us that that's not the case. So why is it so difficult to find joy? Is our memory that short that we just, after a while, forget about it? Is it our threshold for waiting just so little that we say, man, I gave it 5 minutes and I moved on? Do we throw in the towel of hope and joy because it hasn't happened in a little bit? Or maybe the pain and the hardships of life grind the memories of joy out of us, or simply tell us it can never happen again. That was just the old days. That's what happens and can happen in many churches and in many lives, and say it's never going to be as good as it was. That's what life will do to us. It'll tell us that story. Any of those things could be true. A combination of the things might be true. That's caused us to maybe lose our hope and our joy. But it may also be that most of us have been taught to live out our culture's strategy for joy. What does our culture teach us? Our culture's strategy for joy looks like this. It says, eliminate hurt. If it's a painful situation, get rid of it. It can't teach you anything. It's no good. And so we get rid of the pain by numbing our nerve endings. There's no shortage of medications you can take to make you feel better. There's no shortage of things to distract you. We do away with the insecurity by eliminating risks. Read social media and the posts that people put. If this person has done this to you, leave them. Don't cross an ocean for people that wouldn't pick up the phone for you. There's all this advice out there about eliminating the risk of ever being hurt. Right? That's basically what it's saying. If someone could hurt you, don't let them into your life. Keep everybody at an arm's length away. Get rid of our lives of disappointment. We try to do that too, don't we? We keep every relationship at arm's length and say, you know what? I'm not going to expect or hope for too much in you, then I won't be disappointed. You ever had that opinion or had kind of that motive in life? Well, if I expect nothing, then I'm always going to be surprised. Some people would say that positively. Other people would say that with gritted teeth because they've been hurt. But the result of a life dulled to pain, risk-free, and impersonal relationships is a life of deep boredom. If you eliminate all risk, if you eliminate all possibility of ever being hurt, and keep all relationships away, you're going to be bored. So we then try to lighten the boredom, don't we? We're bored with life, so then we try to consume our way to joy by going to entertainment things, by going to booking our calendars full of things we can be entertained with, or educational, or taking vacations, or we just buy a bunch of stuff, and nothing in and of themselves is wrong, but a lot of times it's just to distract us from the boredom we have with the life the safe life we've created around us. We build this bubble around us, but then we're bored with it, so we're saying, okay, I'm going to just now do a bunch of stuff. But we don't see that in Psalm 126. Deep laughter and joyful singing are the result of living in the midst of the mighty work of God. Think about that. Joy comes from being involved in the work of God. It isn't an escape from boredom. It isn't simply a break from the monotony of going to McDonald's one day out of 6 other days, of the same old, same old. It isn't that we crashed kind of a Christmas party, or we cranked the music up to number 11 on the amplifier and we put on enough lights and tinsel to distract us from all that's going on in the world. We're not trying to get away from it and saying, this is my happy spot. It isn't anything to do with ourselves, and it isn't feeling like we've whipped it up on ourselves, like, okay, I got to get in the mood, here we go. No. Joy is the result of the work of God. Joy is what God provides, not as an escape from boredom, but a plunge into God's work. Anybody remember the commercial that invited you to take the Nestea plunge? Do you remember those commercials? What did they always do in those commercials? Fall back in a big old thing of water, right? They'd fall back with it. Anybody remember that? It started in the 70s. I think it went through the 80s. They canceled it and then they brought it back for a while. And what were they inviting you to do? Try this new instant tea, Nestea, right? Take the Nestea plunge. Think about that, because that's basically what God is inviting each of us to do. Because if you are a Christian and you are bored, I would invite you to take the plunge. Not to Nestea. I mean, you can take Nestea and that's all fine and good, but whatever. But take the plunge into the work of God, into God's kingdom. If you're bored with the church or even this church and you believe yourself to be a Christian, then what you're saying is you are bored with yourself, because God's people are the church, not the building. So if you are bored and you don't have any joyful expectations, plunge into the invitation from Jesus to participate in his work of the kingdom. You and I cannot consume our ways to joy. In fact, Paul says in Galatians 5:22, joy is the second fruit of what? The Spirit. He doesn't say it's a second fruit of having the best job. He doesn't say joy is the fruit of a job well done. He doesn't say joy is the thing of being entertained and having a full life. No, joy is the fruit of the Spirit. Joy is a consequence or byproduct of following Christ. The overflow of feeling good, not about yourself. Hear this. Joy is not the overflow of feeling good about yourself, but feeling good about what God can and will do and has done in the past. That's what joy is. We don't acquire joy. We can't buy joy, but instead it comes to us overflowing from our journey following and responding to Jesus. So you're saying, I tried church and it wasn't very joyful. I wanted you to try something else. His name is Jesus. Because you'll find joy there. If you try just to find it at church, you might get it. I invite you to come and find Jesus with us as a church. That's what the church does. It's not the happy center. We're not the trampoline park. We can't make you have a bunch of fun and break your leg at the same time. Well, hopefully we're not breaking anybody's leg. I don't know, maybe. I have to edit that out. But we don't find joy except in Jesus. The benefit, right? Remember last week, if you were here, I talked about a BOGO, buy one, get one free, and the guy that rode his bike from Hawaiian Bros to bring me my food. It's kind of like the same thing. When we pursue Jesus, we get joy. We weren't pursuing joy necessarily, but we get joy out of it. Joy is found, nurtured, and built in response to the abundance of God and in the joyful expectation that God will do it again. I need reminded of that, probably daily. And so when we come into Advent and we get to talk about this stuff, it kind of excites me because I know it's like a salve for my soul. I pray it is for yours too, that we are reminded collectively that the joy of the Lord is our strength. Even in the midst of our pain, suffering, and despair, God's at work. Those things are not indications that God isn't working. Those are indications that there is a sinful world around us. It may feel like things will never change or everything is just getting worse, but remember what God did in Egypt. Remember what God did in the manger. Remember what God did on the cross, and remember what God did on that empty tomb. His timing is not our timing, but his work is our joy. I need that reminder. Advent allows us to be reminded of that. We can have joyful expectation as an echo of God's work in the past. In a world that tries to cover up the pain and the suffering with lights and tinsel, we can wait with joyful anticipation because Jesus is at work. And we get lights and tinsel too. We just don't use it to distract ourselves. We rejoice that Jesus came that first Christmas, and we have the joyful expectation that he will come again. We rejoice that Jesus has changed each of us that follow him, and we remember that change forward to his work redeeming all of creation. Let's fill our minds with the history of God-given joy. Whether it's singing Christmas carols, whether it's reading scripture, whether it's sharing testimony, or whether it's just sitting and reflecting on the goodness of God. So let our minds be filled with the joy that God has given us in the past as we plunge into the work of his kingdom. Let us ask with joyful expectation to do it again. I can tell my kids, hey, we paid a lot of money and a lot of time to be here, so be happy. God paid infinitely more so that we might experience joy. Joy to the world. The Lord has come. And the joy of every longing heart is that he is coming again. Amen and amen. Will you stand with me?